I have a question for you. What would you say, there's a couple fountains, so I'll choose this side. What would you say if I told you this water right here would heal you? What would you think? What would you think? What do you need healing from or for? Or what would you do to receive healing? Or do you believe that God still heals today? If there's one thing I hope you're going to hear today, it's this. Sometimes God asks us to do things we don't fully understand, and yet the only way to experience them is by doing it and saying yes to God. So we're going to read a story about healing, about that question, about what would it look like. And this is a story that maybe some of you have heard. I had a couple people tell me this is one they remember from Sunday school whenever they were kids. It's one that I don't remember from being a kid, but it's a story that many of you probably have never heard of. It's about a guy named Naaman. And I'm just going to read the story and offer some thoughts along the way, some observations, and hopefully we can hear God's voice today. So this comes from 2 Kings, if you want to read along in your Bible, 2 Kings 5, starting in verse 1. Naaman, a general for the king of Aram, was a great man and highly regarded by his master, the king, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. Now, a couple things that I find interesting. One is the king of Aram is the king of the Aramean people. Now, the Aramean people were the enemies of the Israelites, of the Jewish people, and there were, for hundreds of years, there were wars and skirmishes back and forth. They would attack each other. They'd raid each other's cities. So Naaman is a mighty general in the enemy of the Israelite army. And yet it says, but through him the Lord had given victory to Aram, which is interesting, that God gave victory to the opponents of the chosen people, the Israelites. Isn't that interesting? I don't know what to do with that, by the way. I don't even know how to make sense of it, but I find it fascinating that the scriptures say that God had given victory through Naaman against the Israelites. This man, Naaman, was a mighty warrior, but he had a skin disease. Now, we don't know exactly what that skin disease is. It probably isn't full-blown leprosy. If it was leprosy, almost certainly Naaman would have been cast out of the community. He would have been sent out to live in the deserts. It's almost a death sentence because back in many places still today, if you're living in other parts of the world alone, it's hard to survive, right? It's hard to just get food, for example, much less take care of yourself if you're sick. And so he probably doesn't have full-blown leprosy, but he has something that people are worried might become leprosy, might grow into something. So they were scared. You were scared. So it's a health problem, it's a physical problem, but it's also a relational problem. It's also an economic problem. It impacted his livelihood. It's a social issue, how he was treated in the larger society. This is a huge problem because everybody's scared of getting whatever Naaman has. Okay? Verse 2. Now the Aramean raiding parties had gone out and captured a young girl from the land of Israel. She served Naaman's wife. Unfortunately, that was a common activity back then and in many parts of the world still today. Enslavement is unfortunately part of our world. She said to her mistress, the woman that was captured, I wish that my master could come before the prophet who lives in Samaria, where she's from. He would cure him of this skin disease. How many of us have wished for somebody we love to be healed? I only wish they would go to the doctor and stop being stubborn. I only wish they would go talk to a counselor. I only wish they would go to a 12-step program. I only wish they would go to a rehab center. I only wish they would go talk to a financial advisor. I only wish they would. Have you ever prayed that prayer? I think it's interesting that this girl, who, by the way, was captured by Naaman's army. She was enslaved by Naaman's army, and yet she's praying, she's wishing that Naaman would get healed. Doesn't that tell us something remarkable about her faith? So Naaman went and told his master what the young girl from the land of Israel had said. Then Aram's king, Naaman's master, said, "Go ahead. I'll send a letter to the Israelites' king." So Naaman left. He took along 10 kickers of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Seems a little interesting, the clothing, right? That was a sign of prosperity and wealth. And we don't actually, I should say we don't. I couldn't figure out exactly how much this money was. I started reading different commentaries, and one said this, another said this. But almost everybody's like, it's a lot of money. So Naaman's going with a letter from the king of Aram and these clothing and this money to the king of Israel. He brought the letter to Israel's king, and it read, "Along with this letter, I'm sending you my servant Naaman so that you can cure him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he ripped his clothing. Now, that seems a little weird, right? Like he ripped his clothes. What in the world is going on? Back in the ancient times, ripping your clothing was a sign of grief, a sign of mourning, or a sign of distress. So it probably shows like, he's like, what in the world's going on? He's stressed out, he's worried, he's afraid, has anxiety around this. You get the picture? Okay. He tore his clothing. He said, "What? Am I God to hand out death and life? But this king asked me to cure somebody of his skin disease. You all must realize he's trying to start a fight with me." Now, that's interesting, right? I mean, that's one way to read the story. It's not the way I would have read it, right? When you heard the story, you wouldn't have automatically thought that Aram's king is trying to start a fight. At least that's not what the story was reading. What's going on here? Well, the king of Israel is assuming somebody else's motives. Have you ever done this? Somebody cuts you off in traffic or zooms past you, and you assume their motive? Somebody's rude to you in the checkout line, or you assume their motive. Somebody is bullying you at school, you assume their motives. You know what that happens? That gets us in trouble. That's actually what's happening here. It's getting us in trouble. It's beginning to escalate. So why in the world do you think the king of Israel is responding kind of a little emotional? Well, I suspect it's maybe that he had years and years and years in history of the king of Aram enslaving and conquering and attacking them, and he's just bitter and cynical. Part of me wonders if he's a little bit of an agnostic. He's not sure that anybody can be healed, much less that he could heal somebody. He wasn't sure that God could still do healing. The other thing I find fascinating, you'll see this in both the king of Aram, you'll see this in the king of Israel, you'll see this a little bit in Elisha, you'll see this in Naaman. They all have big egos. By the way, I think that's funny, I'm pointing it out on Father's Day, but all the guys in this story have really out of control egos. The women are like, hey, you should get some help. I find that funny. Just letting you know. Verse 8. Sorry, Dad. When Elisha, the man of God, heard Israel's king had ripped his clothing, he sent word to the king. Dude, why did you rip your clothing? Let Naaman come to me, then he'll know that there's a prophet in Israel. By the way, what's the main difference between Elijah and the king's response? Well, the king saw a skepticism and motivations, agendas. Elijah, a man of faith, sees opportunities for God to work. While the king of Israel assumed the worst, Elisha believed in the best. Naaman arrived with the horses and chariots. He stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent out a messenger. Why didn't he go himself? A little ego here, I wonder. Elisha sent out a messenger who said, "Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and become clean." But Naaman went away in anger. See the ego? He said, I thought for sure he would come out to see me. Doesn't he know who I am? Doesn't he know what a big deal I am? Doesn't he know all the wars that I've won? I thought for sure he'd come out and see me. He'd stand and he'd call on the name of the Lord as God. He'd wave his hand over the bad spot and cure a skin disease. Why is he angry? Is he angry because of his pride? Is he angry because he wanted like a David Blaine magic healing show? You know the reason he's angry? The first two words. First two words he said. What did he say? I thought. Well, how many times does that get us in trouble? I thought he should have. I thought she should have. I thought will get in the way of God working in your life. I thought will get in the way of you receiving healing and wholeness. I thought are two words that are opposite of faith. Replace two words, I thought, with your will be done. I thought with follow me. I thought with trust and obey. Okay, technically that's three words, but those two words will stand in the way of God working in our life because it puts us as the most important rather than seeing God as the one who provides healing, wholeness, and help. Verse 12, aren't the rivers in Damascus, in the Abana, and the Paphar better than the Israelites' waters? Isn't the Merrimack River better than the Ohio River? Couldn't I wash in them and get clean? So he turned away. By the way, no. Couldn't I wash in them and get clean? So he turned away and proceeded to leave in anger. Now Naaman's servants came up to him and spoke to him. Our Father, appropriate for Father's Day. Our Father, if the prophet had told you to do something tough, something difficult, by the way, don't we want God to give us something difficult to do? We feel like if we get something difficult, then we feel like we earn it. If we get something difficult, then we feel like we deserve it. Jesus didn't give us something difficult. He said, my yoke is light and my burdens are few. Receive freedom, receive joy, receive happiness, receive life. He said, if the prophet would have given you something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? Yes, because we want to earn it. That's not how God works. He said, God's given you a gift. All he said to you was what? Wash and become clean. By the way, in the Hebrew, wash and become clean, two words. So Naaman went down. He bathed in the Jordan River 7 times, just as the man of God had said. His skin was restored to that like of a young boy, and he became clean. This is the word of God for all of God's creation. Thanks be to God.